All right. We're on the work by Lao Russell. God will work with you, but not for you. A living philosophy. We're in chapter 1, the 11th hour. This message is given to man in the 11th hour of his threatened fall into another terrifying abyss of oblivion. It is written from the depths of my soul with the earnest desire that it will not be a lost voice crying in the wilderness. Once more, man's hard-built civilization has all the evidence of another fall into the chaos and oblivion of another dark age, and for the same reason, it has always fallen. Up to the year 1900, the world had steadily progressed for 8 centuries, but since that time, it has fallen to lower levels than it had risen in those 8 long centuries of upward struggle. The world was very friendly about the turn of the century. Wars and the threat of wars seem to have passed out of world thinking. The pent-up hates of empire-building days were seemingly forgotten. World armament for the protection of neighbor against neighbor had practically ceased. Warships seemed useless and were destroyed by many great nations. Culture was at a high level all over the world. Day by day, great art salons and musical events multiplied, and geniuses were patronized to make the cultural world more beautiful. Then suddenly, in 1914, the old traits of the jungle reappeared, and man once more became the killer and slaughterer. Only this time he killed and slaughtered on the greatest scale ever known. Increasing world unity disappeared, and an unprecedented world disunity intensified. Hatred, fear, enmity, cruelty, and debauchery returned from its forgotten grave and shed the blood of over 40 million human beings in 30 years, besides enslaving countless millions of once free men. Cruelty unknown to the world, even in its 2 inquisitions, became commonplace. Okay, never before in human history had nations enslaved their own people. They made slaves of conquered tribes or of other races, but never their own people, as part of this world has done and is still doing. Millions of our brothers, whom we should love, we steamed and baked alive in huge furnaces. Whole regiments were buried alive in graves they were forced to dig for their own burial. Brainwashing added a new and undreamed of cruelty to man's category of heinous crimes. Today, the whole world is divided against itself and must fall unless love and service come quickly enough to save it. No house can be divided against itself and survive, whether it be one home or a world of homes. If multiplied scientific power causes another Armageddon in our divided world, the civilization we have known will end. It is as impossible for peace to come by waging war as it is impossible for love to come by hating. Man wages war in the hope of finding peace, never realizing that the only fruit of war is war, and any seeming peace is but a truce of fear between wars. Have we not suffered enough to say, Lord, save us from ourselves, lest we destroy ourselves? Or must we suffer more and still more until there are too few left to fight? God's plan is for man to learn the lesson of love upon which the universe is based. He can learn that lesson only by giving love to his neighbor, for reviving by his neighbor. Let me read that one over again. God's plan is for man to learn the lesson of love upon which the universe is based. He can learn that lesson only by giving love to his neighbor, for regiving by his neighbor. Service to one's neighbor is the highest principle of life. The value of every man to every other man is the greatest source of man's wealth and prosperity. World peace and happiness can only be acquired by the realization of man's asset value to man, and the conservation of that value by mutual service. Instead of that practice, mankind has been engaged in the lowest conceivable practice, which is man-killing for greed. Over 60 million men have been employed for 40 years in making man-killing the greatest of all world industries. Over $400 billion have been spent to kill men instead of obeying the brotherhood of man law. Man killing itself was insignificant in numbers during past centuries. Its growth has been so rapid that our modern civilization has killed 30 times as many humans in 50 years as the total number killed in the 5 centuries preceding the 17th century. The difficulty in killing men was great when the bow and arrow was the principal weapon. It became increasingly easy to kill men as the bullet, projectile, torpedo, undersea boat, and bomber plane supplanted the bow and arrow. It is now possible to kill every man, woman, and child within a radius of 20 miles with only one bomb. Surely the ease of killing men has multiplied to undreamed of proportions when we can now kill 5 times as many men in a few minutes as Napoleon killed in all of his campaigns. Is it not time, therefore, that thinking men should get together and look at our degenerating selves as we really are, instead of through a rosy mirror which pictures our brutal, barbarian, cruel civilization with an unearned halo of glory? We have sufficient strength of character to admit that every high stage of our prosperity has been acquired by plunder, piracy, slave making, slave dealing, and vast exploitation of the weak by the might of greed man? Is it not also time to give deep thought to the fact that our strictly man-ruled world has always been a warring world? Man has always expressed man-nature, inherited from his primate fighting jungle days, by marauding, conquering, piracy, slavery, and killing for greed, while women have loved and served and given life to the world. Where man and woman work together as one to make a happy home, they always succeed. Might it not be that a happy world is as impossible without the romance of unity and quality of world fathers and mothers as happy home would be? Man greed of man, the conqueror and warrior, has made the kind of world which faces us today. With love and romance crucified by greed, what hope is there for survival? There is only one sure way to save mankind from his threatened self-annihilation, and that one way is through new knowledge of man himself, dynamic knowledge of who he is, what he is, why he is here, what his relationship to other men is, what his relationship to God and his universe is. With this basic knowledge, he will know his purpose on earth and knowingly work with God who created him, instead of destroying himself by his own hand and working against God, as he is now doing. Ever since man emerged from the jungle of his beginnings, he has been trying to discover himself. Ever since that silent voice within him began to faintly heard at the dawn of his consciousness, he has been forever asking, who am I? What am I? Why am I here? Long centuries have passed, and man still asks those unanswered questions. Man himself is the greatest mystery of the as yet unknown. He has conquered the seas, the skies, the elements, and the very forces which move the universe. Man, the greatest discoverer of many things, has not yet discovered himself. He does not yet know man. He still despairingly asks, who am I? What am I? Why am I here? The time has come when man can know if he will but listen with inner ears to the silent voice within himself. There have been those in past ages who have made that supreme discovery. These have tried to tell others, but their words had no meaning for primate man. Then came the Supreme One who knew. He tried to tell man of his divine heritage, and of his God of love, and of his oneness with him and with all men, but he died on the cross. His words had no meaning for primate man of that day. They still continued to worship a God of fear, a wrathful God whom they sought to appease with blood sacrifice. Even unto this day, mankind has never fully comprehended the teachings of Jesus, the consummate scientist of all time, whose few words contained the greatest knowledge ever given to man. In them is the complete answer to the identity and purpose of man. In them is also all knowledge of cause for which world-renowned scientists have so hopelessly sought. These still ask, who am I? What is gravity and energy and light? And what holds the atom together? Jesus plainly answered even these questions for the future ages of man and pointed the way to their understanding, but men looked and still continued to look the other way. They do not comprehend. Even though men crucified Jesus, the divine messenger of love who brought good into the world to supplant evil, were those who believed on him. Love survived its crucifixion, even though those few who believed on him with great faith did not comprehend his deeper meanings. There are but few in our world of today who comprehend his deeper meanings. God, man, woman, and nature are the only elements man has to know and to interrelate in order to build an enduring civilization. Man's lack of knowledge of these elements and how to interrelate them has caused his hard-building civilizations to fall many times, as it is again about to fall unless man can be transformed by the renewing of his mind in time to save himself from that dread catastrophe. This new concept is, in reality, a new understanding and a new interpretation of the teachings of Jesus, the only fully illumined Christ-conscious mystic of all time. Jesus gave to the world a complete way of life which would have endured forever if men had but comprehended him. Man was still too new, too close to the jungle of his primate days to even faintly comprehend him. People of this electric radio-conscious age are now fully able to comprehend his teachings if they will but throw off old pagan traditions which have been too securely riveted into the thinking of this age. If Jesus were here today to give to the world his supreme knowledge, his greatest obstacle would be in overcoming the pagan misinterpretations of his own teachings, which have built an impregnable wall of superstition, evil, magic, and belief in the miraculous and supernatural around man's thinking. When one realizes that many of our highest intellectuals believed in witchcraft and burned witches alive within the last 200 years, it is easy to see how strong a hold early pagan thinking has upon modern thinking. This will be the greatest obstacle in presenting the real meaning of Jesus' teachings herein. There are many, however, who are ready for new comprehension. If those who read these teachings are sufficiently open-minded to accept them, then we can in fact save this world from its threatened oblivion and replace it with an enduring world of peace, happiness, and goodwill to men. This high pinnacle can be reached only by unifying the whole world into one family. Let us therefore transform the world by the renewing of the world mind. That transformation can take place only by acquiring knowledge of man's inseparable and eternal moment-to-moment unity with a comprehensible God, and of man's unity with man, woman, and nature. The world could have had a dynamic knowledge of God and of his relationship with man long ago, instead of the vague imaginings it now has, if it had comprehended Jesus' teachings. He told man to look within himself to find the answer to all things. What did he mean by that? What is there within man which could be the kingdom of heaven and all things else? He meant mind. He meant that all there is in this universe is mind and body, which means creator and creation, and which also means cause and effect. And that is the answer to all things. It is the complete answer to what God, nature, man, woman, energy, silence, sound, stillness, motion, and all things else are. God's mind and the electric pulsation of his divided thinking constitute the entirety of this universe. Beyond that, there is naught else. God's omniscient, omnipotent, living, conscious mind is eternally at rest. God's electric thinking is eternally in motion. His electric creative thinking extends from centers of stillness to create bodies which live for a period of time to manifest his knowledge of power and action. All living bodies, thus extended from him to express his energy by action, must then return to him for a period of rest before again extending into another pulsation of action. This is the principle known as reincarnation, or repetition of body patterns, which is the characteristic process of nature. Oops. Man conceives these thought pulsations of the living, thinking God to be living and dying bodies of people who have identity and reality. In this tragic misconception lies all the ills which man has made for himself, all of them without exception, from business failures to divorces, from degenerative diseases to wars, from frustrations to insanity, and from the periodic rise and fall of whole civilizations. Oh, the pity of it! And why? Simply because men of that day did not comprehend what Jesus meant when he plainly told them that they could find God within themselves, and then all things else would be added unto them. Instead of comprehending and believing him, the mass mind of the world then and now looks outward towards transient, pulsing bodies of living, dying physical matter for their realities, instead of to their centering spiritual soul mind. Man did just the opposite of what Jesus taught, and made for himself a way of life which has always led to catastrophe and oblivion. He looked outside of himself for his sense of values and chose transient, pulsing, living, dying bodies of material things for his choice possessions, which he thought would enrich him. He looked away from his spiritual self to find love and happiness in mere sensation of interchange with physical bodies of pulsing motion, which had naught but motion in them to give. He looked away from the one great reality within which all power reposed, into the unreality of transient materialism for the power he coveted, and took upon himself a mirage which dissolved itself in its own emptiness. Even the greatest of intellectuals looked the other way, away from the still fulcrum source of all energy, to endow pulsing vibrations of motion with energy. Even they looked for cause and the transient effects of cause. Is it any wonder, then, that the old way of life which man has chosen to follow has never led him to happiness and peace? Has any way of life ever led to happiness, peace, and prosperity which was based upon greed for material possessions and power? Not one thing of man's creating has endured when man looked outward and away from the spirit which centered him. On the other hand, those immortal creations of man which have endured and will endure as long as civilizations last are those works of the spiritual geniuses who have been illumined by the awakening of that divine spark which centers every man. Such words are created in the ecstasy and inspiration of their mind source and reflect the rhythms of God's thinking in them, while the works of man bodies, who know naught but the rhythms of body sounds, live but for the day and are forgotten. The new way of life, which is based upon God awareness within, is now necessary, else we perish. Man's old way of life has always built a world of fear, hatred, enmity, and disunity, the policy being to take from his neighbor that which he wanted for himself by the power of might over right. The old way, which has proved so disastrous, was based upon taking, which created enemies who show their hatred by retaking. The new way will be based upon giving, which creates friends who show their love by regiving. In my husband's Message of the Divine Iliad are these words: all men shall come to me in due time, but theirs is the agony of awaiting. By working knowingly with God's universal laws, our present agony of awaiting can be over, and all men and women can look forward to living in heavenly peace and happiness as one united world family. It is a tremendous challenge and a tremendous goal, but it is a prize in which all mankind can share.